panel, and joining me are Howard Linskey, Trevor Wood, and Luca Veste. So I'm going to pass over to the guys to say a warm welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us. Howard.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Howard Linskey. Delighted to be here with my old mucker, Luca Veste, and the inimitable Trevor Wood, who wrote the debut of the year this year, I reckon. Yeah, great to be here and looking forward to having a bit of fun answering all of your very intelligent questions.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Howard. Trevor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trevor Wood, the Newcastle-based crime writer and author of The Man on the Street and the baby of the panel, because these guys have written like a dozen books at least. So ask them most of the questions, because I've only got one book to talk about, really.
But you must have lots of ideas, Trevor.
Oh, yeah, tons of ideas.
About. That's fine. Luca, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Luca Veste. I've written books, apparently, and people have read them, apparently. And I'm happy to be here because this room is empty. And I haven't been in many empty rooms since this lockdown started.
Well, we can keep you there for about the next 50 minutes or so, Lucas, so we'll give you a little bit of sanity as we go. But how are you guys all doing? These are strange and unusual times, so we can't ignore it. How have you all been finding it? Any homeschooling going on? Anything unusual, or is it much like a writer's life, just with more people in the house?
Yeah, that's what I've been saying. It's not changed a lot, has it, really, for writers, I think?
No.
Authors are ideally suited to lockdown, particularly this week. As you know, Lucy, I had a deadline yesterday, so it hasn't felt very different, to be honest with you. So at least I was able to concentrate the mind and get it done and get it handed in. So that was good.
Yeah, I've been. I've the kids are off, so we have to do homeschooling and that, but they've been quite good. They seem to be doing their own thing, like after the first couple of weeks. What I've noticed though is that I'm having to do that Joe Wicks every morning.
Oh. That didn't last long in our house, Luca.
I mean, I don't do this much exercise normally. I'm all of a sudden like exercising every day.
Yeah, it is a bit crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm quite
my daughter.
Go on, Lucy.
I was just going to say my daughter started off with good intentions the first week or two, and it's gone. Easter holidays came, and no more.
my daughter's 22, so not a problem with homeschooling. But she's stuck in Vancouver at the moment. Which is a bit of a blow, but particularly a blow as we should have been out there with her, and I should have been in Hawaii now. Should have been flying back from Hawaii tomorrow. So yeah,
that sucks.
I know, sympathy. Come on.
Oh, lots and lots of sympathy.
Well, even more exotic than that, I should have been doing Newcastle Noir today.
Yeah.
Oh,
you know.
So we've got you instead. That's great.
Yeah,
I was doing it on Sunday. I was flying back from Hawaii on Saturday night and doing it on Sunday. Jet lagged to hell.
Oh, goodness.
Probably for the best. Actually thinking about it, probably for the best.
So there are some small graces then, I suppose. And we get you, which is a bonus. So thanks again for joining us all anyway. So seeing as Howard's touched on that he had a deadline yesterday, what can you tell us about what you're working on? Or have you been finishing off things like Howard, desperate to meet deadlines and they're due out?
Yeah, no, this is a second draft, so it might change a little bit. It's meant to be coming out either at the tail end of this year or possibly early next year. It's currently called Don't Let Him In. And yeah, the first draft went in, Penguin liked it, so that was good. So they didn't fire me or anything. The second draft I put a lot of work into, so hopefully they'll like it more. I now get the next bit from my editor, which I always refer to as the bit with the 160 comments on. That authors will be familiar with down the side, where they go, I love this, just a few things. And then you go through them all going, oh. And quite often it's tiny things. And then there are things where they go, this scene's great. Is there any chance we could move it forward 50 pages? And you go, oh, okay. Butterfly effect, everything changes. And so, yeah, that's the brain melt phase, I find, with the writing process, where it really does your head in. And you come out the other side and hopefully have a book at the end of it that people will like. So, yeah, that's what I've been doing.
So is that a standalone, Howard, or is that
It is, yes. So it's a standalone. It was an idea. Oh, I think I kicked all that.
It's not your beer, Howard, is it? Not your beer.
No, heavens for fan. No, that didn't get spilled. Thankfully, that's something minor like a book or a DVD or something. But yeah, so this is a story. I should stress this might change because authors are like that. Whenever we're at a synopsis, by the time we finish the book, we don't recognise the synopsis. So It could older, but the gist of it is that a girl returns home. It's a woman in her mid-20s. She returns home because her father dies, and she has to come back and sort out his house, his crumbling old house and his estate. And it turns out, quelle surprise, in a crime novel, that there may have been foul play involved, that he might have been murdered, and that his case might be linked to the fact that he's a former newspaper editor who was looking into a murder. And it was, I don't know if you know the case, but it was loosely, the idea came from me about the Bakewell Tart murder. That's known as the fact that the poor woman who was killed got that awful nickname. As people tended to get 20 or 30 years ago, they get these horrible tabloid nicknames. And an editor looked into this case and proved that the guy who'd been convicted of the murder didn't do it, and he got him out. And the lad had done years and years inside because he was, I suppose you would say he had learning difficulties. I suppose that's the best way of describing it now. That was a true to life case. It wasn't what I based this on. It was just the more I did the research, the more I started finding out facts in this case. Yeah, interesting, I think.
So, Trevor, are you working on anything at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, a bit like Howard, I've been editing mostly. So my second book is pretty much finished now. It's going to the copy editor now. No, go on.
I was just going to say, is this a carry-on from The Man on the Street?
It is, yeah. It's
we have a sequel.
Called One Way Street. In fact, the ebook's due out in October, I think. So we're cutting it a little bit fine, but the copy editor's got it now, so hopefully that'll be out soon. But I've just been asked to write a short story, which is a really new thing for me. I've literally never written one at all before. But it's for an anthology for the homeless, to raise money for the homeless. So I'm working on that at the moment, struggling, but it will come.
Oh, good. You'll get there. It's a new challenge and a new string to your bow, Trevor, isn't it?
We will see.
Fingers crossed. And you, Luca, what have you been working on whilst dealing with children rampaging around the house?
I've just finished another draft of a book that comes out later this year. That's called The Game. And see how that goes. As Howard intimated, you never know until you get the notes back if you've actually written a book or just a really short pamphlet that you know. So I finished that off at the end of March, beginning of April, and I've gone straight back onto the book that I've been working on before that, which will be like next year. So that's so they're both new standalones. But the one I'm working on for next year led me to do a research trip at the beginning of March, just before all this happened. I was over in Connecticut in America doing a research trip for that. So yeah, I got in there just before it all locked down. So I was very lucky.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, that kind of answered a question from Caroline Maston, who did ask what future releases do you have coming up? So Caroline, I hope that we've got some answers there for you. Howard, I do have a question from our group founder, David Gilchrist. And he would like to know, is there going to be a sequel to Alice Teal is Missing? And if so, will it be with the same main characters?
The honest answer is I don't know yet. I'd like to write about them again. The strange thing is, though, that was meant to be a standalone, but I've had a lot of people like the characters, so I might get not stuck in a good way into another series. I did that when I wrote The Drop. It was meant to be a standalone, and there were 3 of them, so that was a series. I then wrote No Name Lane that Penguin bought, and they wanted 3, which was a shock because that was meant to be a standalone. So that became a series, and now Alice Teal is Missing is getting good reactions to the characters. So I'd really like to revisit them, but it's a question of finding the time, really. So fingers crossed. Hopefully, David. Yeah.
That's a bit of a theme, Lucy, I think. The Man on the Street was absolutely meant to be a standalone. It's about a homeless man who sees a murder.
Yeah.
I didn't intend he was going to stumble over bodies for the rest of his life, but but publishers like series. I like the characters, so they wanted a second one and possibly a third.
Certainly very likable characters in it, Trevor. So you did really well. Yeah, I'd love to see them again. So
well, you will soon.
Yeah. And Luca, do you plan to go back to any series or anything, or start a new series? Or do you prefer the standalone format at the moment?
I get the question a lot because I wrote 4 books in the Murphy and Rossi series, and the last one came out, I think, about 4 years ago now. And I get the question, will there be another one quite often? And the answer I can only give is I don't know. It's highly doubtful because it's been so long, and the publishers I'm with, they've been asking for standalones, so I've been writing standalones. Because I was writing a 5th in the series, and I changed that to The Bonekeeper, and then I now get the question as well: are you going to write a follow up to The Bonekeeper? Which again is another one where I go, I don't know. At the moment, ideas that come to me are very much for standalones and not for series characters. That just seems to be what's happening at the moment. Whereas before, when I was in the thick of writing Murphy and Rossi books, they were all Murphy and Rossi ideas. Right. And anything that came out that wasn't quite a Murphy and Rossi story got kind of shelved, which is what happened with The Bonekeeper. Is that I had that idea pretty much like the week after I started writing, which was very late, like just about a year before Dead Gone, my first novel, came out. That idea has always been there. It just did never fit with Murphy and Rossi, and it wasn't until I was writing a standalone that I could actually use it. But like all the ideas that I have at the moment are very much standalones. They're very much, central stories that only work that time. So yeah, at the moment, it's standalones are very much more fun for me anyway, because you can do whatever you like. You don't have to worry about it. You can put Murphy, if you've got series characters, you put them in peril. The reader kind of always knows that they're going to come out of it. Yeah. And they may be damaged and get moving forward. But with a standalone, you can kill anyone you like.
Unless you're writing Game of Thrones, then you kill everybody. And,
you just kill everyone anyway.
No matter how well liked they are.
Luca, I don't want any plot spoilers for the 6th because I'm about halfway through it, so be careful.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Can't give out any spoilers tonight, Jen.
It's all right. I wrote it like 2 years ago. I can't remember it anyway.
That's what nobody realizes that, I think, but mostly when you do these panels, the book you're talking about, you finished 18 months ago at least,
Yeah.
You've got to try and remember stuff.
Yeah.
Fabulous. I've had my wrist slapped. Apparently, I didn't introduce you properly, Trevor. So Trevor Wood, author of The Man on the Street, is with us tonight, folks. Very sorry if I did miss that out.
I thought I introduced myself. Did I not do that?
Yeah, no.
I imagine that.
Not to worry.
You did.
I'm an amateur. Thanks for putting up with me. But talking about standalones, Luca, there was a question for you from group member Simon Walton. And Simon would like to know, are all your standalones going to be set in or feature woods or forests in some way?
Yeah, why not? No, it just so happened. What I know why is that the last 2 books have featured woods, and The Bonekeeper was predominantly a wood-based novel, whereas the 6, a couple of times there are woody kind of areas, but not many. But what happened there was that I was writing a completely different book to the 6 that is now going to be The Game, which comes out later this year, which hasn't got any woods in it at all.
Right. There you go, Simon.
And when I went back, when I moved away from that one and wrote the 6 instead, the opening within the opening 100 pages, something happens in the woods, and that's just because that's where they are. But yeah, but wood settings, I'm going to let you into a secret, are really cool for creepy novels, because anytime you kind of set something in where it's like, well, someone just turn a light on. You can't do that in the woods. It makes it a lot. It's cheating, basically.
That's good cheating, though, Luca. I like that thinking. That definitely shows you put some thought into that. I like that. Oh, you're menacing, aren't you? Okay, we've got a question from Valerie Keogh. She says, I've been at Noir at the Bar, Edinburgh, and was bowled over by the brilliant readers, but the rain was coming down in a deluge. Do you think the weather has a huge influence on the darkness of some of the writing in the north?
That's Scotland, man. Scotland. Northern England's beautiful all the time. Glorious. Yeah.
Does it affect? So it doesn't affect it then? That's your short answer to Valerie. No.
I quite often, if I want to do something particularly dark, I quite often make it rain. because it does seem to add a kind of sense of oppression, I think, to a
Yeah.
scene. And it kind of piles on more misery as well, if that's what you're looking for. So it's useful. It's useful, but
Yeah.
it's a myth that the weather's not. It's brilliant in Newcastle all the time. Sunny, lovely.
I must admit, I visited once and it didn't rain on me.
Yeah,
so
see?
there you go.
We just pretend it's really grim so that people don't go down the beaches in Northumbria and we get them all to ourselves.
Howard, quiet man.
You've given that away now, Howard. You have given it away.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can find you some more questions. Oh, Caroline.
I'd answer that as
sorry,
well.
Luca.
I think the what where you live and how you live does have an effect on what you write. I know that when I wrote the earlier novels in my series, it had a massive effect because, and this was pointed out to me by someone who knew me, we lived in a house that was not great. It was a lot of damp, and the landlord would never sort it out. And that kind of seeped into the writing, that every house that people went into in the book, where you wanted to kind of say, you know, this was like a house in not a great area, or they were, you know, people who were struggling, they would always have damp or mold in their house, and that was from me living there. So I think weather and where you live does have an effect. It can only have an effect. I don't think I could write the same novels if I lived in a mansion. They would be I'd be Barbara Cartland if I lived in a mansion.
Now there's an image and a thought.
But it's very grey, I find, and the skies in the north are always pretty grey most of the year. But when the sun comes out, it's glorious. I mean, like going down the prom where the River Mersey is on a sunny day is the best thing ever. So that's when I don't write on those days.
Fair enough. You've got to get out and enjoy the sun while it's there, haven't you?
Exactly.
So yes, Caroline was asking. She says there seems to be a northern powerhouse at the moment in crime fiction. Why do you think that is?
I think there are more northern, certainly not northern and northeast writers than when I started out back in 2011. I think my debut came out that year, and I think I had a similar experience to Luca in that we were writing about stuff that wasn't set in London or Glasgow, which all the crime novels seemed to be back then, and there seemed to be a slow awareness of publishers that A, there was life outside of London and Glasgow, and B, there were readers outside of those areas. And I was lucky that I got an editor in Emad Akhtar who knew Newcastle. And correct me if I'm wrong, Luca, didn't you have an editor who went to Liverpool Uni as well and knew Liverpool? I'm sure that isn't the only reason we were published. We wrote amazingly good books, but at least they knew what we were writing about. They actually understood the cities and the atmosphere and the people a bit better than perhaps another editor would have done.
Excellent. We've had a question come in on the stream. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me who's asked it, but somebody from the group has asked, what are your memorable moments as authors?
I've got an answer.
Brilliant. Over to you.
It's got nothing to do with books, but it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't an author. But I played Glastonbury last year.
Oh, wow, yeah. That is magnificent.
That is brilliant.
As part of the Fun Loving Crime Writers, as part of the Fun Loving Crime Writers, the band of failed rock stars, as we got asked to do Glastonbury, and we played Glastonbury. It was the best moment ever, and that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't a writer. But I probably have to think very hard for something of a book. I think just the first time I took my kids to see my book on a shelf in the Asda around the corner. They couldn't believe that their dad was there where all the books were, and they couldn't believe that. That moment was brilliant. And they get they're less enthused about it now because it's happened 6 times. They're like, well, that's what's supposed to happen. What time's tea? That type of thing.
Instead of being more impressed, they're less impressed.
Exactly. So but that was a great moment, and it was
lovely.
I tell you what. Sorry to just keep at.
No, it's okay.
There is one moment that kind of trumps everything. I had in my home city's massive train station, the main train station, Lime Street Station. We had a massive billboard for the Bonekeeper. And the first time I saw that, I was on my own. It was at 10 o'clock at night. I'd come back on the train from somewhere, and I was on my own, and I saw it in lights, and I was like, oh wow, that's a bit different. And there's a picture that I took the next day with my wife and my 2 kids. We went over and we took a selfie with the poster, and that's on the wall because that's a moment that I'll never forget.
I don't blame you.
Did I confess here, Luca, that I was at Glastonbury last year, but I didn't actually go and see the fun.
Did you see Stormzy? Because I never got to see him.
Yeah, I did see Stormzy. He was brilliant.
I'd have rather seen Luca.
I can't believe he turned down Luca for Stormzy. I mean, there's no.
I'm not sure.
I'd have been there with you, Luca.
Probably a good call on my part, I think, ultimately.
That's fighting talk, Trevor.
Mine's going to be non-book related as well, and given that I'm surrounded by both the player manager and the coach cheerleader of the England Crime Writers football team, playing for them and beating Scotland 3-0 in Stirling last year.
I was surprised Luca didn't put that as his finest hour, because I'd go for that one.
That was just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So that's the non-book related. The book
we do get to play for England once a year at Stirling, although I was injured last year, but it's tremendous playing alongside Luca the Cat Veste, for his goalkeeping prowess. That was a high spot. And watching the Scots being very unhappy in the pub afterwards when we beat them usually was fantastic. Pretty good.
You didn't realise you were surrounded by a football team, Lucy, not a bunch of crime writers. So.
You were expecting book-related answers to these questions. High spots, weren't you? But I've got a book-related one out. My debut was voted by the Times newspaper one of the top 5 thrillers of the year for the year it came out, 2011. Wow. So I just want that on my gravestone. That's why I'm making it public. I don't bother with when I was born or any of that nonsense. Just put 2011 top 5 thriller writer of the year, dead. Fine.
My book-related one, Lucy, is when I walked into Newcastle Waterstones and saw a whole display of my book, and then they shut the bookshop 3 days later, and we went into lockdown.
Luca, stop laughing, you mean man.
That's horrible.
On the plus side, it's still there. I can see it through the window.
Yeah,
on the plus side. It's been there forever.
With your nose pressed up against the glass, bless you.
I was there the other week and I took a photo and I looked around. I'm the only person in the entire city centre. Literally the only one.
Goodness.
The thing is, though, Trevor, when it reopens, it'll still be there.
Yeah, for about a day, like.
Yeah, but that day when you've got all those people running in to buy books, they'll see yours first. You'll be the biggest seller.
That's a good point.
Fingers crossed.
Well, while we're just talking about your book, Trevor, Alex from the group has popped a question up saying, having just finished Trevor's book, I was interested to see whether the style of the audio narrator changed what you would do in a later book.
Oh, interesting question. Interesting, not least because Howard has shared the same audio narrator for some of his books. Actor called Dave Nellis, who actually worked with in the theatre way back. So it was really nice when they nominated somebody to do my audiobook that actually knew. I think it's tricky, because you don't write books to be read out. So when you hear them read out, there's always going to be some bits that don't quite work because they're not meant to be read aloud like that, I think. But I don't think I'd change the style of it to suit the audiobook, I guess. I think it's a different discipline, really.
I've had a bit of trouble with my audiobook narrators. Is that I had one for the first 5 books who, because all my books are set in Liverpool and all the characters are usually from Liverpool. But the guy who did the audio narration, I don't think had ever been to Liverpool or heard anyone from Liverpool. So he was doing a Scouse accent, which the rest of the book, so I remember the very first time I heard it, the main narration where he's just reading out prose. I couldn't believe I'd written these words. I thought it was the most amazing thing. And then he did a Scouse accent, and it's one of those accents, and I'm sure the other 2 guys will say, for Geordie, is that if you know that they're not from there, you can hear it straight away. So anyone else outside of Liverpool never said anything about the Scouse accent. Everyone I knew was like, "Who's that guy doing this?" But for the 6, I finally got my way, and we got someone from Liverpool to do the audiobook narration, and it was actually a very well-known legend in Liverpool, actor, a guy called Neil Fitzmaurice, who played Ravon in Phoenix Nights, and he's been in The Office, and he's done tons and tons of stuff. He's absolutely brilliant. And he did the audio narration, and it's the first time I've actually listened to my book, like an audio book, and listened to it and gone, okay, I feel all right about this. But the poor guy did the first 5, was incredible until he had to do a Scouse accent. And I think that's what the issue is that for us, it's very difficult to kind of separate how we think it's supposed to sound to how the reader will take it. Because I've had reviews for my audiobooks where it's like, I thought the narrator was brilliant, but the book was pants.
Right. Not the feedback you're kind of after, though, is it? Oh, dear. We've had another question come in, gents, while we're on. Again, unfortunately, I'm sorry, group member, I don't know who you are. It's just coming up as Facebook user. But somebody has asked, at what age can your kids read your books? Can kids read your books?
My gangster one's probably 40. According to my mother, at least, I remember her saying that when the first comment she made about reading The Drop was, well, your daughter, Erin, you know, she'll be 40 when she could read that. Filled with violence and sweary things. But 13, 14, I suppose. I mean, I try and look back on when we were younger. We used to look at stuff and read stuff that was too old for us. I was reading Stephen King and James Herbert at 11. So, you know, you kind of forget that. You have to remind yourself that it's not an innocent world, that, you know, they've never heard these things. They hear more swearing in the playground than they do in our house, I hope. maybe a little more.
Yeah, I think much the same, Lucy. I think it depends how you feel about swearing. That's my only reservation, I think. And I don't give it. I don't care about swearing.
No.
So 14 maybe.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, I mean, I think every kid's different, aren't they, though? I mean, like, I was like Howard. I read The Stand at like 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
And that's because, you know, my dad didn't care if someone called social services on him, I think. But it was when because I want my kids, obviously, to read my books. But I mean, apart from the fact that I don't think they'll be into crime, they seem to be much more into fantasy and sci-fi and all that kind of thing. But hopefully at some point they will. But I've got no issue when they want to read them. I can't have an issue given what I've read when I was a kid. But I think Emma, my wife, might say something about if I handed my 10-year-old The Bone Keeper, because I don't think she'll sleep again.
and look how we turned out, Luca. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with us at all, is there? Reading all that horror and crime when we were 11.
I'd have to join that. I'm guilty of that. I was reading about horrific hauntings probably at my daughter's age of 10, but she doesn't want to read that, but she'll watch the Lord of the Rings films and not blink an eye about the gore and the hacking and anything. So it is strange, you know, so there we go. Now, we've got a question. I've opened up my laptop next to me so I can now see who's asking these questions. We have a question from Samantha, one of our admin team, Samantha Brownlee, and says, do you undertake much research?
Well, one of us goes to Connecticut to do it, which is pretty cool.
I've never felt more like a real writer.
Sets his book in Liverpool, but goes to Connecticut for the research.
I
know. I've got to work out how to swing that. Do you claim it against tax, Luca?
Of course, yeah, that's an expense, that. Yeah, I mean, my first book was very much psychology based, so I researched that book by accidentally starting a degree a year before that, and ended up doing them as a mature student. Studied psychology and criminology, and then each book has been different research-led books. And I don't tend to do much research on the police procedural side because I feel like there are enough books that I've read and still read in that genre that there is kind of like a baseline level of what you need to get right and what you can kind of get away with. I mean, the first couple of books I did I taught to DSs in Liverpool, and what they told me was that 95% of the time we're just filling out forms, and the rest, it's really boring. And I thought, I can't put all that down. But as the books have gone on, I mean, The Bone Keeper, I did a lot of walking in the woods at night time, which was a mistake.
No lights to turn on.
No. And for the book that comes out next year, I went to Connecticut because I've been to America, but I've only ever been to Florida. So
Right.
it was a very different book than one that would be set in Disney World. So I went over there because the next book will be set. Most of it will be set in a small town in Connecticut. But that was the first time I've done like a proper writer's research trip, and I've never felt more like I was walking around with a little notepad and everything going, "This is great." This.
Did you
Can I
have your
just ask Luca, when you're arrested in the woods in the middle of the night, do you tell the police officer you're researching a book? And what does he say? Yeah, of course he was. Yeah.
Didn't believe me.
What about you, Howard? Do you do much research or?
Well, it depends on the book. For the historical novels that I've written two set in World War II, one of which was a true story. So I had to do a lot of research for that. And I went out to Prague because that's where the event happened. There was an assassination of a German general out there. So that was a good excuse to go to Prague and research every bar and restaurant there, just in case. But yeah, with the crime stuff, it's kind of an awful admission, but I seem to know quite a bit without having to research it. So I guess I've read too much about that over the years anyway. There are people I could ask if I get a bit stuck, but I do try and just research by reading or going online. And I try not to put too much research on the page. Because, it's good to know things and then write about them like you know them.
Yeah.
But I try and avoid spending page after page describing something that isn't plot related, that it's just background. It's all very... I know some people would be interested if you spent 4 pages talking about what the pathologist gets up to before he goes into his office or whatever. But it doesn't really interest me. So I'll read it all and then maybe not use much of it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I can understand that. It makes you feel... Does it make you feel like you're writing from a more informed position, even if you don't, like you say, put it in the novel?
Exactly. And thankfully I have had people who say, oh, my husband's a detective and he liked the book. So I'm thinking, well, that's good. He's not doing that thing that people do where they go, that would never happen. So I'm sort of getting away with that. The history side of it is weird because I've had at least 2 reviews where I've been picked up by people who told me I was wrong. And I actually researched it and I know I was right. And the temptation to wade in and go, clever clogs. No, I'm thinking you're fine. Don't do that because it's not a good look, is it?
Never go there.
Argue with someone on Amazon. Was this review helpful? No, it was not. It was wrong.
Trevor, before you answer that question, we did actually have a question from group member Mike Hemming, who has just read The Man on the Street at my recommendation, so that's good, and he's really enjoyed it. But Mike did ask whether or not, as part of your research for it, did you sleep rough on the streets of Newcastle?
I saw that on the Facebook page, so I was kind of prepared for that one.
Good.
Before I start that, I'd say I've learned from these 2 already that I'm going to set my next book in Fiji.
Right.
And see how that works out.
Yes to that.
I mean, the quick answer to Mike is no, I didn't. And that's partially because I think it's cheating. I think it's like when you see these MPs who go on telly and live on benefits for a week and, think they know everything about it. And it's just not representative. It's just... And I think doing it for one night is kind of meaningless, really, because it would probably be fine. And, it would be uncomfortable and miserable, but it's not the same as doing it every day, day in, day out. So
I didn't do warm house as well.
Yeah, exactly. But I did have to do a ton of research because my protagonist is a homeless veteran suffering from PTSD. So I got the veteran stuff. I was in the Navy for 16 years, so I didn't need to do anything for that. But for the homeless stuff, I went to visit the People's Kitchen in Newcastle, which Howard may have come across. It's a voluntary charity that serves about 100 meals a night to the homeless every day of the week. And I had a good look around there and had a chat with some of the users and the volunteers. And then since then, I've been working there. So I've been working there about the last 18 months, cooking up a storm every Tuesday afternoon.
Brilliant.
Which was really useful and, got me a lot of information. And the PTSD side, I came across a fantastic book called The Veteran Survival Guide.
Right.
One of my main sources, which was written by an ex-army guy who served 2 tours of Northern Ireland and got hideous PTSD, saw some terrible things and came back and ended up in prison because he committed murder twice.
Oh, crikey.
Both times as a result of his PTSD. He's now written this book about how veterans should be treated and how they need help to survive it and the kind of implications of the whole thing. And that's been almost a textbook for me, really.
Yeah.
So, the answer is quite a lot, really. But most of it in Newcastle, sadly.
Yeah, and not necessarily on the streets yourself, but
I'm
yeah,
a new boy.
talking
I'm
to
learning. I'm learning.
Yeah, of course. Well, seeing as you're learning, this might be an interesting question from fellow author Valerie Keogh. Do you read reviews on your books?
Of
Any
course.
of you? Do you?
Most people do, I think. Go on, Luca, you go. I've been chatting.
I was going to say, I used to. When I first started out, I used to. But I started taking, I stopped reading the good ones and would concentrate on the very, very few bad ones. And that kind of thinking, that kind of thing it can only lead to issues, I think, when you're writing, is that you start thinking about like trying to change what you're doing, which I don't think is a great thing. I took them too much to heart, I think, and that's why it's a good thing that I don't do anymore. And there are people who I will listen to and take their opinions and stuff like that. But if I get tagged on Twitter on a review on a blog, I'll open it tentatively and just make sure.
Yeah.
But I don't go on Amazon anymore and refresh the page. Not anymore. I can't do that anymore because it was just leading me down a bad road where it was just not great for being productive more than anything. Yeah. But I appreciate them because without them, no one would find us. I was a blogger myself when I first started out. Howard will tell you. One of my first reviews on the blog was for The Drop. And so I know how important bloggers are, and I always appreciate what they do. But they're for readers, not for us most of the time. They're for readers. So as much as I appreciate them, I don't tend to read a lot of them anymore. I just say thank you and hope for the best.
My tip for anyone who gets a bad review, no matter how infrequent, is pick your favorite book, the one that you absolutely love, go on Amazon, then click on the 1-star reviews. Yeah. And then you realize you're not alone because every book on there has got some 1-star reviews. Yeah. So I did that once. I got a review that said one of my books was really dull, and then I clicked on Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the John le Carre book, and my review was entitled Dull, Dull, Dull. And I found a review for him that said boring, boring, boring. So I thought, well, I'm in good company. We read the good ones, appreciate the good ones, and try and laugh off the bad ones. Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can't please all the people all of the time, can you?
No. Everyone's different. I mean, there's books that I love that people will hate, and there are books that I don't enjoy that people will enjoy. Everyone's got their own opinion, and that's perfectly fine. And as I said, reviews aren't for the writer. They're not there for them. It's for other readers to kind of pick out what they've said about the book and decide that sounds like it might be for me. So you might have a reviewer which says this contained gratuitous violence and lots of swearing, 1 star, and then someone else could come along, read that, and go, I love a bit of gratuitous violence and a load of swearing. That's for me, and go and buy the book. So I never get kind of bogged down in I used to. First couple of books, I refreshed that Amazon page like every few hours, and it was not good. But yeah,
are you back, Trevor? For a moment, I was just picking up the message. I wondered why you'd frozen, but unfortunately, Trevor, you froze like this.
Really? You look like you were drinking a yard of ale at one point.
That's not untypical.
So long to go down.
I've been caught out by camera there. I have no idea what happened there. It just all completely collapsed on me.
I think there might have been a glitch because my daughter just came through and told me she'd been kicked off the PlayStation. So unless that was her dad and I'm not aware of it, there might have been a glitch. Who knows? Who knows? We've had another question come in, and I think I've actually got this one on my list. It's from Jonathan Mayhew. Writing for a certain locality, like a city or region, how do you avoid midsummer syndrome, i.e. the notion that so many awful things happen in one place? Or is the reader's suspension of disbelief needed here? That's a good question, Jonathan.
It is problematic, I think. I mean, as I said earlier, I thought I'd written a standalone, and that was partially because I've got a homeless protagonist, and I didn't want him stumbling over bodies every 5 minutes. However, he does live in a big city, which helps, not like summer. And also, the kind of things that he is involved in are crimes that kind of get passed by, really. Runaway kids who die of drug-related deaths that nobody really cares about and nobody really investigates that much. That's the kind of thing that Jimmy will get involved in the future, I think.
Right.
So there are kind of crimes out there that don't really pass over the police's radar, I think. So that's my saving grace, I think.
Okay. Howard, what about you? You've been quiet for far too long.
Well, I vary the locations a little bit. They're all set in the northeast of England, my crime novels, but I've had some set in Newcastle, some in Durham, some in Northumberland. And so I tend to focus on one mystery, whether someone has disappeared or dead. So it's not necessarily always going to be 7 or 8 victims or what have you. It's going to be maybe one, and I can create different places to suit that. So I'll invent a fictional town maybe. So it's not necessarily a stretch. Oddly enough, the one I'm working on is a bit more stretching that credibility element of whether you've got more than one victim in a small town. And I've had to almost bang the drum that the place is a little bit odd, it's a little bit unusual. And I found that in a way, as I was going through the second draft the other day, that was helping the atmosphere for the place a little bit, that it was meant to be atypical. And it's not that they have a different murder every week or anything. It's just that it's a little bit unusual, and statistically there's been more death or disappearance or unexplained violence there, which kind of adds to the vibe. But it's not supernatural either, because I don't really like doing stories like that where all of a sudden it's I don't know, a corpse coming back to life killing people. That's not really my thing. That's the only one where I've had anything more than maybe 1 or 2 victims in the same place, you know.
Right. What about you, Luca? How do you avoid midsummer syndrome?
I think I do think that the fact that, you know, the Midsummer Murders has lasted for so long is because I think audiences are willing to go along with that suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Liverpool isn't generally well known for murders. It's more petty crime and more that kind of thing. In fact, when I was researching my first novel, the last serial killer I could find was from the 1800s. Who was and that was a so-called Black Widow, you know, like the woman who killed 4 of her husbands or something. So, like, there has to be a suspension of disbelief in that sense. Jonathan Mayhew, I think, is the children's author who's writing a crime novel now, and he's from my neck of the woods, actually. And so, if he's worried, no, I want more people writing about this area. Because there's more of us, it makes it into a thing. Because when I first started writing, I didn't really know anyone who was writing in this area whatsoever. In Merseyside, who was writing crime. There was only like a couple of us, and there's been a few more since then, which is great. I think that's a fantastic thing. I think the more the merrier. But I think the idea is that, like, you know, I think audiences are very willing to kind of go, wait, if the story's great, if the characters are interesting, they're willing to go along with it. They are willing to suspend that disbelief for a 400-page novel. It can only be a good thing for us, because if you start counting up our body counts, you know. I also see each book, with a standalone especially, that's set in the same area. It's almost like a clean slate. You know, what came before didn't exist. I remember writing the 6, and I had a reference to the Bone Keeper in it, and my editor said, "Let's take that out. Let's pretend that's in a different universe." And I think that's a good idea. Is that, like, you know, they're all kind of different books. They're all different universes. It's not the same kind of thing. It's just that's where it happens. But the story is the most important thing.
Yeah. Excellent. So what actually inspires you guys? What gets your creative juices flowing?
Deadlines are good.
They're very motivating.
Really.
Deadlines and alcohol.
Real life stuff is good, I think. I quite often, given that I've got my books set in the homeless community, there's a lot of stories out there, and sometimes you read something and think that I'm so using that. I read one recently. There was a huge piece in The Guardian. I think it was called The Invisible City or something like that. But it was about a guy who built his own shelter underneath Hampstead Heath. He literally dug a huge bunker and basically built himself a house, but underground, where nobody knew, with no permission. Nobody knew he was leaving. He even rigged up like a cooker and all kinds of stuff. I mean, he ended up in prison because when they dug the thing out and found out about it, they found a gun and they charged him with terrorism acts, and he's in prison. It's look it up, Luca. It's a fantastic story.
It's a great article. I read it.
It's a brilliant article. And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh, I'm so using an underground bunker somewhere. I've been wandering around Newcastle during lockdown on my exercise walks, looking for places where my guy can dig an underground bunker. I hope that's not a plot spoiler. I've no idea what I'm going to do with it. So it becomes important. Forget I ever said it.
You told us that, Trevor.
Slightly scarily, I had to do quite a bit of research into bunkers because of the Chosen Ones novel that so there was a killer and he's basically imprisoning people underground, and I looked into that, and one of the things that really inspired the story was finding that there's a place in St Andrews in Scotland where two brothers decided they wanted to buy a farmhouse, and the estate agent showed them around the farmhouse, and they were, yeah, we're going to get this, it's lovely. And then they said, just before we confirm this, could you tell us what's behind those doors? And there was this big blast door, and they opened it up and went down, and it was a secret underground nuclear bunker from the 50s and early 60s that was decommissioned long ago. And it was massive, like numerous rooms, including a room a bit like those ones they have where on World War II they pushed the fighter pilot emblems around, you know, in the middle of the Battle of Britain. So there was a control room. And the brothers bought the farmhouse and decided to renovate it and turn it into a museum. And so now you can go there, and there's a cafe and all sorts. It's called Scotland's underground nuclear bunker, or secret bunker, I think it's known as. I thought, what an amazing thing. It cost me a day's writing because I ended up reading so much about it that I thought, hell, I was supposed to have written 1,000 words today, but all I've done is read about this bunker. But that really inspired me, thinking maybe my story's not as far-fetched as I thought. The premise being, what if they'd been evil instead of nice? What if they'd said, oh, we've got a little bunker here and we'll use it, you know? That kicked me off.
Excellent. What about you, Luca? What inspires you, my dear, to get writing?
It's various things. It's like it's questions. I ask myself a question. So like the first novel was, which as I mentioned, was very much about psychology. I was studying psychology. One of the very first lectures we ever had was about moral and ethics. You know, morality and ethics within psychology. And they did a whole hour on that, and then right at the end, they gave us like this is what we used to be able to do. And one of the experiments that they talked about kind of went, okay, they did it to animals. It was horrible. And the first thought is obviously that's a terrible thing. The second thought was, what would happen if you did that to a person? And that's where the book came from. And every book, there's always been a kind of question I want to ask myself. The 6, which is the latest one, was very much like if you did the worst thing you could ever do as a group, how do you get over that? How do you get past that if you never own up to it? And if someone you feel like someone knows that you've done this, how do you keep living your life? And that's very much what the book is about: is living with guilt, living with that knowledge that you've done something terrible. How do you ever get past that? And every book has always got one of those questions for me to answer, and I try and answer it for myself first in every first draft. And then every draft after that is to tell that story in the most compelling and interesting way.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. Okay, well, we are getting close towards our time running out. We're not quite there yet, so we'll see if we can get a couple more questions in for you. So I was wondering, this is one from me. Do any of you, I mean, you do all seem, Trevor, so far, I appreciate you've done book 1 and you're on book 2, but you've all generally written in crime. Do you have a book inside you that you're tempted to write, but it means stepping outside of the crime genre? And how do you feel about that? About authors who've maybe got a reputation for crime? How do you feel about venturing out like lots of other authors do? What do you think? Have you? Do you want to?
I think Howard should take that
one already. Yeah. So I've done crime.
You have done a lot, in fairness, haven't you, Trevor? Sorry, Howard.
It's all right. I've done crime fiction. I've done historical fiction. I wrote a book that I was asked to write for kids to help them learn to read. So that was like a historical non-fiction children's book. I am the ghostwriter of a non-fiction memoir of Nick Dunn, who was one of the Chennai Six, who was imprisoned in India, wrongfully having done nothing. So that came out a few weeks ago. like Trevor, just before lockdown. So the timing wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
And I've also I've written a book that I don't even know really how to define, except to say that it's hopefully like a humorous gift book, and the publisher who's publishing it looked upon it.
I know the one you mean.
Funny. And it's a spoof of mindfulness called The Little Book of Pintfulness, all about why beer is better than yoga, really, and mindfulness. So that's only 5 genres. I think maybe romance is the one I wouldn't tackle.
Oh, give it a whirl. Why not? We'll make Barbara Cleveland out of you yet, Howard.
A beery, crimey historical romance might be.
What about you, Luca? Is there anything you fancy writing that you haven't yet? Anything that comes from your comfort zone, or do you not have a comfort zone?
I don't really have a comfort zone. Crime itself, the crime fiction genre, wasn't my first love. My first love was horror. I grew to love crime in my 20s, and it's never really been my go-to. If you handed me 2 books, one was a crime, one was a horror, it's more likely I'd kind of want to read the horror. I don't know if that's just because I read so many crime novels just to keep up with what's happening in the genre. But yeah, if it was anything, it would be probably historical. I'd love to look at certain things from my own history, because the name is obviously not Scouse, it's Italian. I'm half Italian, so I'd love to look at where, like, the stories my nan would tell me about her life could fill an entire series of novels. I'd love to go and do something like that with a historical element to it. But that's about it. Romance, no, I can't write anything with any kind of intimation of sex in it because my grandma would kill me.
Reason, Luca.
I've never written a sex scene because I'm petrified that someone will read it and go, "That's not how you're supposed to do it." And I've realised for 30 years I've been doing it wrong.
That's why he goes in the woods at night.
Exactly right, exactly. You go to the woods, no one judges you in the woods, Howard.
Trevor, moving on.
I think I can follow that. I can follow that. I mean, I don't really need to, because before I became a crime writer, I co-wrote a dozen comedy plays. So kind of crime is me stepping out into a different genre, really. Yeah. But one of those comedy plays, you'll be delighted to know, Luca, was called Dirty Dusting, which so it has that impact. It's like makes things fall off walls.
Oh man,
that was hilarious. Which is about and Dirty Dusting's about 3 elderly cleaning ladies who start a telephone sex chat line. So it's been on at the Royal Court in Liverpool. It's been everywhere. Kind of.
That sounds like a Victoria Wood play almost. You know.
It's a franchise. It's played all over the world, which has been brilliant. So I've kind of already done that. So crime is me stepping out into a different place, really.
Mate, you were upstaged there just slightly.
I know. Come on.
Trying to sabotage it in the last few minutes. I don't know. Go on. Let's just finish with a little bit about you guys. Have any of you got any interesting hobbies or any interesting facts about yourselves that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I kind of revealed I spend a lot of time at music festivals, an awful lot. Been to Glastonbury the last 6 times in a row. Ziget in Budapest the last 2 years. South by Southwest in Austin, all over the place. So I'm really missing that. I don't know what I'm going to do in the summer now, because that's where I spend a lot of my time. So that's my main interest is music, really. Yeah,
you're all quite musical, aren't you? Obviously, Luca, you've got your band.
Yeah. I mean, that's the main thing now. And I was a musician before I was an author.
Right.
I was just a very failed one at that point, because I'd done the pub circuit, I'd been in bands, and it never got anywhere. So that now what I get to do is just so much fun, because there's no pressure on it. So someone has asked there which pop vinyls hit me. It would be Stranger Things. It's Brenna from Stranger Things, and also Bob and Scrubs from Stranger Things.
I can't see the questions.
I think your kids threw them at you, Luca, didn't they?
Yeah, I did check to make sure. But I also collect a lot of stuff. You can see it on the shelves behind me. like little figures and stuff like that, and I do a lot of that.
Bit of a pop vinyl fan then.
Yeah, I like pop vinyls. I've only got like 3, and 2 of them managed to hit me. But yeah, I do a lot of Lego, I do a lot of jigsaws. I'm a very boring person these days.
I don't believe that for 1 minute. Howard, come on, dare I ask?
Yeah, I mean, for years I was able to say, "Oh, my hobby's writing," and then that got very confusing when it stopped being the hobby and it actually started being something that was published and people were buying. So, apart from the obvious one of enjoying socialising, hanging out with these two, and going to the pub with them whenever I see them, I used to play a bit of football every week, 5-a-side, not very well, and then I snapped my Achilles tendon, so I may have to retire now, possibly. So I now
never.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll be Rafa again, and just stand on the touchline. But I now spend my time moaning about Newcastle United and praying that Mike Ashley's going to get kicked out. So champagne's on ice for that one. The other things I like, cinema and theatre. Cinema, I've always been a film fan. So I suppose I'm probably as influenced by film as I ever was about books. And I still think about like writing scenes, not chapters. So I'll think, I've got to go upstairs and got to get in the office and write that scene is the way I'm thinking it, because I visualize it like that. And I love being able to sit down and watch a good movie.
Yeah, brilliant. Luca, just out of my own interest, the Fun-Loving Criminals are actually one of my favourite bands. Do you know, have they heard of you?
They've been tagged on Twitter a few times by confused fans. We know that. It was the now departed program director of Edinburgh Book Festival who came up with the name jokingly, and we like that, we're keeping it. And I'm a fan of the Fun-Loving Criminals as well, and I'm kind of hoping that they have, and that they kind of they looked at us and gone like, who are these? Who are these? But yeah, so yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's hopefully. I mean, we haven't been sued. So that's the main thing.
Have the lawyers been in touch? That was the question.
That's it, yeah. So that's a really important point.
Well, on that note, before anyone gets into any trouble with anybody, I'm afraid we've got to call time on this, guys. Our next panel with Ellie, our Edgar Award winner, is waiting in the wings. Woo! It has been an absolute pleasure, gents. An hour just wasn't enough to spend with you. Please come back to us at any time. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone for watching. Hope you've enjoyed.
Nice to see you guys.
Bye, guys.
See you now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.